Before we start analyzing the game, I have a very important message. At the time of me making this video, the Steam version of Crash Time 5 Undercover is not out yet. Because of that, in this video I am analyzing the original 2012 retail release. The Steam version of Crash Time 5 Undercover is also going to be different, and because of that I will also revisit the game once the Steam version gets released. But for now I'm stuck with the original 2012 retail release. And speaking of the original retail 2012 release, back when this game came out, the game was heavily criticized for a number of reasons. I'm not going to say every reason right now in the intro, I'm going to talk about it later, but I had to mention that it was heavily criticized, not only by the Crash Time fandom, but also the entire racing game community. There's one thing that I've said several times before, but I have to say it probably one last time. I've played every Crash Time game before, including this one, and I have to say, back in the day, I really didn't like the game, for many reasons. Crash Time 5 Undercover came out in 2012, and now, 12 years later, I finally decided to give this game another chance. Have my opinions changed? Well, read the title of the video. Also, in case you didn't hear me the first time, the game wasn't received very well and the community portrays it as a bad game. So in this video we are going to be answering the question, how bad is Crash Time 5 Undercover really? Hi everyone, as always Patrick here. If you're already subscribed, make sure you turn on notifications, otherwise YouTube won't tell you if I posted anything. If you are new to the channel, make sure you watch until the very end and consider subscribing if you like it. Okay, Crash Time 5 Undercover. Crash Time 5 Undercover was developed by Cinetic and published by DTP Entertainment in 2012. Just a quick heads up, I am going to be very negative in this video. So before I start complaining about everything, I want to talk about the good qualities of the game first, or in this case, redeeming qualities of the game. Because believe it or not, this game does have redeeming qualities, few as there may be. First redeeming quality, the graphics. For a game released in 2012, graphically, the game looks pretty good. High quality textures, high level of detail, good effects, even better particle effects. Yeah, I just can't complain about the graphics. To prove my point, let's compare the graphics of Crash Time 5 Undercover to other racing games that also came out in 2012. Dakar 2012 aka Rally Raid, WRC3, Insane 2 and Dirt Showdown. Crash Time 5 Undercover definitely looks better than Dakar 2012 or Rally Raid, definitely looks better than WRC3, looks just slightly better than Insane 2, and unfortunately it looks worse than Dirt Showdown, but Crash Time 5 Undercover is still a good looking game. Usually I also talk about the graphical options the game gives you, but I'm not going to do that today. But that's because the game shares the same graphical settings with Crash Time for the Syndicate. So if you need to know more about the graphical settings in Crash Time 5 Undercover, watch my Crash Time for the Syndicate video. Oh yeah, I usually also talk about the game's stability, but this time I'm going to talk about it later. Second redeeming quality, The story. Yeah, the story is actually somewhat decent in this game. The story of Crash Time 5? Well, I'm going to keep it short. Ben and Samir go their separate ways to go undercover, and while they are undercover, they have to stop several bad guys, and then they get the bad guys, they arrest them, and the day is saved. What's so special about the story? Well, I can't really put it into words. You have to play the game yourself to understand what I mean. Even the voice acting has improved. Well, it's still bad, but at least it's not as bad as it was in previous games, so that's something. Third redeeming quality, the sound design. The sound design in this game is fantastic. In my Crash Time 4 video, and other Crash Time videos for that matter, I've complained that the cars don't sound punchy enough. And I've got to say, Cinetic actually fixed that issue in this game. The cars now sound good and punchy. Not only that, the car sounds are also much more realistic. I have two examples of this. The Prio cars now sound like real hatchbacks, and the Excellence V12 no longer sounds like a flat 6. Not only that, everything about the sound design is much better compared to the previous games in the series. The braking sounds are much better, the environmental sounds are much better, the crashing sounds are much better. Everything about the sound design is just better when you compare them to the previous games. What can I say? I love the sound design of Crash Time 5 Undercover. Honestly, the entire sound design of Crash Time 5 Undercover would make for a great ASMR category. But, and that is a big but, if the sound design is the best thing I can say about your game, you know there's a problem. Yep, it's time for me to complain for the rest of the video. But this time I'm going to do it differently. I will start from the smallest issues, then I will quickly move on to some bigger issues, and then finally I will talk about the biggest issues of Crash Time 5 Undercover. So, let's get started. The motion blur and the depth of field are horrible in this game. Thankfully, you can turn those off in the options. But even if you disable those options, this doesn't improve the stability of the game. You see, the PC version of the game has horrible frame rate issues, even if you have the highest settings on a decent PC that can run other 2012 games perfectly. You see, my PC is a tiny bit outdated, but at least I can run this game perfectly. And get this, despite the fact that I can run this game perfectly, I was only able to get 85 FPS max. That's terrible. It honestly feels like Cinetic made the console versions first, and then the PC port was an afterthought for them. Another afterthought is the subtitles. You see, in the game, sometimes the voices don't match the subtitles. For example, in the very first level, there's a part where Ben and Samir are talking to each other. Ben says, "Put your foot down," when the subtitles say, "Pedal to the metal." I mean, come on, they didn't even try here. And since they didn't even try with the subtitles, I'm not even going to try to talk about the soundtrack, because it's forgettable. I can't remember a single song from this game, except from the main menu theme and the 2 or 3 songs that were carried over from Crash Time 3. Yes, there are 2 or 3, I can't really remember, Crash Time 3 songs in Crash Time 5 Undercover. Why? No one knows, but they are there. And they're actually much more memorable compared to other songs in Crash Time 5 Undercover. And those were the smallest issues. It's time to move on and talk about those bigger issues. There's something off about the damage model. While the visual damage looks great, there's something off about how it affects the handling and the physics. That's because the damage doesn't affect the physics and the handling, except when the damage meter is above 50%, then you will notice a difference. But the difference is so small that you might not even notice it. Sure, sometimes the nitro doesn't work and the car struggles to accelerate, but other than that, the turning feels the same, the braking feels the same, and pretty much everything else feels the same, so why even bother? I don't even know what to say about the physics because they are boring. When you drive, the laws of physics are applied and the cars react accordingly to the laws of physics. And that's about it. No, seriously, what do I say about the physics here? I'm pretty sure that other people that play the game can explain it better than I can, so if you play Crash Time 5 and you think you can explain the physics of Crash Time 5 Undercover better than I can, well, go ahead and explain it in the comments down below. Since I can't say anything meaningful about the physics, maybe I can say something meaningful about the handling? I can. Kinda. For this section, I'm going to show you a clip from my Crash Time 4 video. Once the clip ends, I will explain why I showed you that clip. The physics in Crash Time 4 are pretty good, but they have some issues. In the previous games, cars felt okay to drive, but they also liked to spin out. Assuming you played those games without turning on the Arcade Plus mode. Crash Time 4 completely changes this. Instead of spinning out, you just slide for a few meters. Sliding in Crash Time 4 is also much more controllable, so even if you slide out too much, you don't have to worry about losing too much time when you're chasing your opponent. Time for some more comparisons. In the previous games, cars felt like they were made out of feathers. In Crash Time 4, the cars are a bit heavier compared to the previous games, but they still feel like they are made out of feathers, especially when you jump off a ramp. Now let's talk about the handling. The handling in Crash Time 4 is a little bit odd, since it's optimized for city street racing rather than drifting in dirt. Now I know what you're thinking. The handling in Crash Time games was always optimized for city street racing. And you'd be right, but Crash Time Force offers something that some of the previous games in the series don't. Off-road racing. Now there aren't many off-road locations in this game, but they showcase a pretty big flaw with the handling. Unnatural feeling when racing on dirt. It's hard to explain, but when I was driving on dirt, the controls felt kind of floaty and unresponsive. But maybe that's because I was playing without Arcade Plus mode on, so I don't know, maybe that's just me, maybe you had this problem as well, I don't know. Well, racing on dirt didn't feel really good for me when I was playing this game. Now I know what you're thinking, why am I showing you this? That's because the physics and the handling in Crash Time 5 are relatively untouched when you compare them to the physics and the handling from Crash Time 4. So I guess you could say that I could say something about the physics. I just didn't know how to put it in different words. So what I was trying to say is that when you compare the physics and the handling from Crash Time 5 to the physics and the handling from Crash Time 4, there's not much of a difference. But Cinetic did change one thing that drastically changes both the physics and the handling. In Crash Time 5 Undercover, Cinetic made every single car oversteery. Because of this, the fantastic physics model and the handling model from Crash Time 4 The Syndicate is now thrown out the window. Those cars are undrivable. For the record, I've played the game without Arcade Plus and without the driving aids. I also turned off the minimap and every single indicator. Because of this, I was constantly spinning out and failing every mission. Oh yeah, even if you turn on Arcade Plus and you turn on every driving aid, well, the cars are still undrivable. The handling and the physics are just horrible because of this one change. You will never be able to drive normally in this game. That's very bad. Other aspects of the game are just as bad or even worse, such as bad car selection and bad track selection. Every car behaves the same because of this one change that I've talked about previously. Driving is unsatisfying and the cars are undrivable. But it's not just that. You see, a good amount of cars were removed, those ranging from the Semir Police, the Ben Estate Taxi and others. What's even worse is that some cars in the past titles didn't even return, such as the Sapphire or Sapphire, Tribune or Tribun or whatever, or Giant Laka, I don't know how to pronounce that one, all of which are better cars than the tasteless new supercars in the game. Oh yeah, the supercars. Cinetic decided to add supercars to Crash Time 5 Undercover, and that was a bad decision. Those supercars are extremely ugly, they're overpowered, and they also outclass every single car in the game. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, overpowered and undrivable. A terrible combination. And since I've mentioned something about the cars being ugly, I also have to say that some returning cars, or should I say every returning car, has worse facelifts, especially the Excellence V12. The Excellence V12 looks hideous, but then again, so does every single car in the game. The Crash Time series is known for having very good cars, and also good looking cars, and also functional and drivable and, you know, all that stuff. However, thanks to the removal of free roaming, some vehicles remain unplayable as aforementioned. Oh yeah, the removal of the free roaming. Cinetic decided to remove free roaming from Crash Time 5. You know, the most recognizable part of the Crash Time series? Yeah, Cinetic removed free roaming, meaning you can't mess around anymore. It's possible to free roam using the cheat Wanna Go when you're in a single race, or a single race mode. However, it's not a good substitute for actual free roam, as the opponent cars will still appear and crossing the finish line will eventually finish the race. And with that, free roaming is also disabled. There is a mod that brings back free roam, and that mod was co-developed with an actual employee from Cinetic, so it means that the mod is perfectly functional, right? Well, it is, but it also exposes a very big problem. Those maps are incredibly empty. There's nothing you can do in this game. You can only drive on designated roads, and if you go off-roading, the game immediately puts you back on the designated road, even when you use the free roam mod. But guess what? The removal of free roaming gets even worse. Because free roaming was removed, the circuit racing side missions were integrated into the main story and became... Wait a minute. Oh yeah, the circuit racing side missions. Do you remember the racing circuit side missions in Crash Time for the Syndicate? Yeah, they were pretty boring, weren't they? Well, at least they were optional. They were only mandatory if you wanted to unlock every single car in the game. But here, well, let me explain. Because free roaming was removed, the circuit racing side missions were integrated into the main story and became obligated to progress through the story. And the circuit racing missions themselves are pretty boring and have little connection to the story. The funny thing is, those racing circuit missions have good track design, something that I can't say about the rest of the game. Or should I say the rest of the tracks in the game. So you've probably noticed that I didn't talk about the normal racing tracks in the game. To be honest, those normal racing tracks are so bad, they are not even worth talking about. That's how bad they are. Because of that, I'm not even going to talk about those tracks, and I'll just move on and talk about some other big issues. Despite the fact that the racing circuit side missions have better track design than other tracks in the game, they decided to remove the nitro from those races, so you can't boost as you please. You have to use your skill to win those races. Because of this, those circuit racing side missions are at best boring and at worst infuriating. Why infuriating? I will explain that later. And I have a good explanation for that, don't you worry about that. Okay, let's do a quick recap on what we have already established. The motion blur and depth of field are done horribly. There are some mistakes in the subtitles. The game has a forgettable soundtrack. The PC version has frame rate issues. The free roaming was removed. What else? Many good cars were removed. The supercars are tasteless. The cars look ugly. and many other things, mainly regarding to the handling, the physics, the cars are undrivable, and honestly, I don't even want to list everything. You can always go back to when I was talking about all of those things. I think you can tell that this game drains me emotionally. I mean, I can't even speak normally now. What's going on? I think you can already guess the answer. Also, making this video drains me emotionally as well, because I have to talk about a game I don't like. But if that's all this was, it would be just a bad Cinetic game. Not much to say here, just a bad Cinetic game. Cinetic tries to spice this game up, make it less monotonous, give it more variety in its gameplay. Yeah, that makes the game way worse. This is it. The time has come. It's time to talk about the worst qualities of Crash Time 5 Undercover. This is gonna be fun. First of all, the campaign has a horrible issue with pacing. Let me quickly tell you how you progress throughout the entire game. You start off the game with an action-packed mission. Then you have a circuit racing mission. Then you have another action-packed mission. Then you have another circuit racing mission. Then you have yet another action-packed mission. Then you have yet another circuit racing mission. And you do that throughout the whole game. The formula, or should I say this formula, stays the same throughout the entire game, and it never changes. It makes the game incredibly boring, or at least the campaign, but it's kinda the same thing when you really think about it. So half the time you feel like you're actually doing something, and for the other half you just feel like you're wasting time. Not to mention that some of those missions last way too long and they just don't stop, especially the circuit racing missions. Some of them have more than 5 laps, some of them have even more than 7 laps. Why? Those missions really overstay their welcome, and they really don't need to be this long. The auto-balancing also doesn't need to exist. Yes, this game has auto-balancing. When your racing game is about crashing into stuff, the auto-balancing is the worst thing you can implement. Not to mention that the auto-balance in this game is broken. It is broken because it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. So sometimes you can get some sort of satisfaction by crashing into stuff because the auto-balance doesn't work. But when the auto-balance works, the crashes just aren't impactful. That's not how it should be. It's a broken system that does more damage than fixes. Speaking of more damage than fixes, the city map has been removed, making you stuck on country roads. So the Autobahn map is empty and boring, and the replacement map for the city map is also empty and boring. And there are also country roads, which I will also complain about later. Now don't get me wrong, the maps in Crash Time 4 The Syndicate were also kinda empty, but they weren't boring. You know, they had their problems, but this is just ridiculous. Crash Time 5 Undercover is also harder than previous games and... okay. I'm gonna assume that someone from Cinetic thought that the previous Crash Time games were too easy. On that, I can agree. So, what did Senetic do here? They increased the difficulty, but in a bad way. When you play this game, you're pretty much stuck with the easy difficulty. Why? Because on normal and hard difficulties, the opponents are way too fast. It kind of feels like Rubber Band, but it's not really Rubber Band. The opponents are just way too fast for no reason. And unless you're cutting corners or just using illegal shortcuts, you won't be able to catch up to them. You have to use those techniques to catch up to them. But there's a problem. In previous Cinetic games, when you were off-roading, the game gave you like 2 or 3 seconds to go back. If you were good at the game, you could also use this time, those 2 or 3 seconds, to your advantage. If you were fast enough, you could easily use illegal shortcuts and overtake your opponents. But in this game, as soon as you go off-road, well, most of the time, the game just sends you back. And then you lose several positions because of that. So all you have to do is play on easy and then the problem's solved, right? No, the problem is not solved because Cinetic decided to add a new mission type to this game. Evidence disposal. Evidence disposal is the worst mission type in the entire series. In this mission type, you have to dump evidence while avoiding police cars picking it up. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, guess what? There are 2 different scenarios for those evidence disposal missions. The first type is when someone is disposing of the evidence, and then you have to pick up the evidence. Well, if you miss one evidence, you have to restart the mission all over again. And sometimes your opponents can drop dynamite that can easily destroy you, and then you also have to restart the entire mission. Great. But you know what? That's not even the bad part. The bad part is the second scenario, where you have to get rid of the evidence and the police cars can't pick it up. But there's a problem. Regardless of the difficulty you're playing, your opponents will always pick up the evidence, no matter how hard you try. Now, the game does give you dynamite that you can use to slow down the police cars, but I swear that it doesn't work. And get this, there is one mission where Samir explains to you, the player, how to get rid of the evidence efficiently. What's the catch? Samir's strategy doesn't work. This whole scenario is entirely luck-based. Why would you even think to do that, honestly? Also, every single mission has requirements. The higher the difficulty, the stricter the requirements. In hard mode, some requirements are way too strict to complete, and this mission will perfectly shows why. Yes, this mission, the one you're seeing right now. This is on hard mode, by the way. So in this mission, you have to go through all the checkpoints in a very limited time, and the time in hard mode is very strict. Few seconds. Seriously. And no, it's not a hard mission. Sure, I got stuck here and it took me a couple tries to do this, but at least I didn't rage here. because the actual rage-inducing missions are the evidence disposal missions. So yeah, now you're gonna watch me fail this mission a lot. So I'm really sorry that you have to watch this, but I'm also too lazy to edit, to be honest with you. I mean, this video is way too long already, so I'm not even going to edit that much now. But you know what? You can get used to those strict requirements pretty quickly actually. What you can't get used to, however, is off-roading. Off-roading in Crash Time 5 is abysmal. Every time you use an incline on an off-road surface, the car becomes a bouncing bean. It just keeps bouncing forward and you can't stop. Like, it just keeps going. And no, dedicated off-road vehicles don't fix this issue. Oh, and I almost forgot to tell you one important thing about the evidence disposal missions. When you have to dispose of the evidence, you can't cycle through the evidence and the dynamite. Not that it matters, the dynamite is useless and the evidence is going to be picked up anyway. Also, about those fails you're watching right now, when I play a game that I really don't like, there comes a time where I just can't be bothered and I just don't focus on the game at all, and then I make very stupid mistakes, as you can see here. So once again, sorry for the bad footage here. Alright, time to talk about the final worst quality. The most abysmal quality. The worst of the worst. The weapons. In Crash Time 3 and 4, you had a pew pew and a drone. You could use those at any time. Well, mostly the pew pew, because the drone wasn't all that useful, especially in Crash Time 4. But the thing is, the pew pew and the drone were very useful, and it also fit with the whole detective aesthetic, you know, since you play as detective or two detectives. And the detectives do use pew-pews and drones in real life, so it all makes sense. But in Crash Time 5 Undercover, you don't get the pew-pew or even the drone. Instead, the pew-pew and the drone are replaced with supernatural weapons. That's how I describe them. They're not actually called that, it's just how I describe them, okay? Crash Time 5 Undercover gives you 7 supernatural weapons. One where you can paralyze your opponent, one where you can attach to your opponent, one where you can destroy your opponent's tires, one where you can make them spin out of control, one where you block the road, one where you protect yourself from damage, and one where you can just repair your car. Sounds familiar? Yeah, of course it does. I mean, what is this? Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2010? Actually, you know what? No. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2010 is a great game. It does not deserve that comparison. Not only the weapons were implemented badly compared to Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2010, it also doesn't fit in Crash Time 5 Undercover. It just doesn't fit the whole aesthetic and theme and feel of the game. Those weapons do not belong here. Oh, and I suddenly remembered something. There is another abysmal quality, the crash cams. I've left them on so that you can see how abysmal they are. They last way too long and they are very inconsistent. Sometimes you can have a hard crash, you can crash really hard into something, and the camera doesn't activate. But sometimes you can slightly tap something and then the crash cam activates, and it lasts way too long. It's badly designed. But thankfully you can turn it off in the options. Oh no, I've just realized that the video is 40 minutes long and I still have a lot to talk about. But not about the bad or abysmal qualities this time. No, I'm done with that. Now I have to talk about a few other things about the game. Don't worry, I will try to keep it short, but is it going to be short? Honestly, I have no idea. As you can tell, I really don't like Crash Time 5 Undercover. Before I made this video, I actually decided to check out some YouTube videos about Crash Time 5 Undercover. I was looking for some reviews. I wanted to see what people think. And I've seen some videos that actually praise Crash Time 5 Undercover. There is one video that implies that Crash Time 5 Undercover is one of the best racing games ever, because the person that made the video really loves this game. Now, I did watch those videos, especially the one where that one person says that I've watched that one person that loves Crash Time 5, and I have to say I do understand where he and those other people are coming from, because the graphics are pretty good, the story is somewhat decent, and the sound design is fantastic, but everything else is bad, or at the very least painfully mediocre. I am also fully aware of the Steam release. Yeah, the Steam version of Crash Time 5 Undercover is coming soon. And before the game releases, I would like to suggest some things. I strongly believe that the Steam version of the game will fix a lot of issues. That's because the developer and the new publisher already announced that they are fixing a lot of issues that are present in the original. So this is the part where my suggestions come in, because I do see an alternate universe where Crash Time 5 is a very good game, but the developers have a lot of fixing to do. So if there's any developer watching this, all you have to do to make Crash Time 5 Undercover good is fix the damage model, fix the physics, fix the handling, fix the maps by making them less empty, bring back free roaming, remove country roads, or at least fix the country roads, get rid of the circuit racing missions, or at least fix the circuit racing missions, fix the progression, fix the campaign, fix the cars, add cars from previous titles, make cars look good, especially the facelifts, improve the facelifts, fix the frame rate issue, fix the whole frame rate issue, add those unplayable cars that were removed, that are unplayable because of the whole free roam removal thing, improve the voice acting, optionally improve the graphics, improve the sound design, improve the story, but those three things are optional, fix the subtitles, fix the soundtrack, fix the entire game, and add multiplayer from the console versions. If you manage to do that, then I will be able to say that Crush Time 5 is a good game. Developers, if you are watching this, you can do it. I believe in you. Okay, now we can finally answer the question. How bad is Crash Time 5 Undercover really? Well, it's bad. Not abysmal, but bad. I'm actually going to revisit this game once it gets released on Steam. And I have to say, the developers are aware that the original 2012 retail release of this game has a lot of issues. So they are fixing those problems, and that's why I want to revisit it. I want to see if they actually manage to fix every problem I have with the game, because if they actually will fix every problem I have with the game, then I will be able to say that Crash Time 5 Undercover is a good game. But I still have to wait for that day to come. So until then, just don't buy this game, don't play this game, at least the original version. And if the Steam version also ends up being bad, then don't play the Steam version as well, honestly. While Crash Time 5 Undercover does have good graphics, somewhat decent story, and an excellent sound design, it has a lot of issues. No free roaming, empty maps, annoying circuit racing missions, evidence disposal missions which are just infuriating, lackluster car selection or just simply bad car selection, cars with horrible facelifts, frame rate issues, unplayable or unusable cars, bad subtitle work, forgettable soundtrack, and a lot of problems with the handling, the physics, and other stuff like that. Don't play this game, because Crash Time 5 Undercover is a waste of time and a waste of money. And with that, I have finally analyzed every Crash Time game. Well, at least the Crash Time games with the Crash Time name on it. There are also 2 or 3 more Crash Time videos I want to make. There is one game that I like to call Crash Time Zero, and that's under the Alarm for Cobra 11 name. So I'm going to analyze that game one day. I'm also going to do something special with the Crash Time series. And this video will involve all Crash Time games. So, what is it going to be about? Stay tuned and you will find out. Like I've said, I'm also going to revisit Crash Time 5 Undercover on Steam once it gets released, so again, stay tuned. I was also thinking about analyzing Crash Time 3D, you know, the Nintendo 3D exclusive, but I don't own a Nintendo 3DS, so that's not gonna happen anytime soon. So yeah, I just felt like saying that because the video is already long enough. You know what, this video is over 50 minutes long now. I have to stop working on this video right now. And I'm actually going to stop working on it now, because I've said everything that needed to be said. The game is bad, don't play it. But that pretty much sums up everything I wanted to say in this analysis video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Just